Hey guys, and welcome to a video on my favorite weapon in Monster Hunter World, the dual blades. More specifically, we're going to cover elemental dual blades. Now, quick note on this video, it's going to be two parts. First part's going to cover skills I prioritize for damage, and a few that I ignore, along with skill synergy. And the second part's going to consist of recommended armor pieces and the builds that I use. Now, as most of you know, Monster Hunter World's damage meta heavily favors crit, both crit chance and crit damage. The weapons that benefit well from critical element tend to edge out their damage slightly ahead of just building for raw. What I mean by this is not all weapons get the same benefit from elemental crit. Weapons like dual blades, sword and shield, and bow in most cases build for element because their elemental crit multiplier is higher, being 1.35, than say a weapon like greatsword, who has a lower modifier at 1.2. All that being said, there's a place for raw damage builds as well. In most cases, they aren't really that far behind elemental ones. And in specific cases, say Nergigante's White Spines, they're ahead. Now, before we get too far into this, I just wanted to make a quick note. Now, there are some builds in some specific situations that benefit from skills that I personally don't value very high. Things like power, Master's Touch, specifically in the PC version of the game, have their places and there's certain builds. I know there's a really good build for Nergigante's Claws that uses Master's Touch, actually specifically against Nergigante, that works really well, but outside of those specific build setups, they don't really function that well for me personally, and those specific setups work well with armor we'll get in the future, like Behemoth gear. Before I go too far into that as well, one last quick note. Yes, I am using a transmog armor mod. Yes, I am playing on the PC. Yes, we do use mods, but primarily use mods that have to do with just visual aspects. I don't like to change too much of the way the game works. So in case anyone is curious about this, it's the transmog armor mod, and I've also got a retexture for Odegaron gear. So that's all there is to that, but let's go ahead and jump right into skills. So when we're looking at elemental crit, there's a few things that we want to prioritize because of the game's damage formula. First and foremost, pretty simple, we're looking at just elemental attack up. Elemental attack up increases the weapon's elemental damage to a cap. Now keep in mind, elemental attack power has a maximum limit, so each weapon has its own limit that it has for elemental attack power. In most cases, when it comes to dual blades, you're only going to get about 1 or 2 ranks in this. I'm sorry, 2 to 3 ranks in this. Most of the time it's going to be 2. In certain situations, like we'll go over later in my Kieran DB build, you'll get 3 points in it, but most cases you're running about 2. After that, it gets up to a cap. We want to push it up as high as we can, since of course, more elemental damage we have, higher the crit is going to be, when we of course add it with the multiplier. And speaking of elemental crit, where are you? Haha. Rathalos Mastery. So the next skill we prioritize is a 2-piece set bonus. Rathalos Mastery 2-piece critical element. It increases the elemental damage of fire, water, thunder, ice, and dragon. I say this specifically because the game likes to put, what's it called, ailments alongside of elements, and it kind of puts it over there so some people confuse this, but it only increases the damage of these elements when landing critical hits. Now, like I mentioned earlier, critical element does benefit dual blades much higher at a 1.35 multiplier than other weapons, so this is very valuable to us. Keep hitting a right click when I go through this. Next skill we're going to take a look at is Weakness Exploit. Should come to no surprise to anyone. It's 3 ranks, it's 50% crit when hitting a weak spot. Now, when you're playing solo, not a huge deal, you're always going to go for the weak spot. Playing in a group, however, you have to be a bit careful. Dual blades are really good at getting trips. They're also really good at tripping up your enemies. So position properly where you can still hit weak spots. I mean, things like Teostra's head's pretty big, you can still hit those weak spots, but also remember that you help the team out a whole lot by getting those trips and things like that. So try not to trip up your team and try to keep tripping up the monster. But in situations like Weakness Exploit, it's still very strong. You still want to get it. It's 3 ranks for 50%. It's no brainer. Next on our list is Critical Boost. Now, Critical Boost increases the damage of critical hits. Specifically, non-elemental critical hits. Now, the crit multiplier is already 1.25 for non-elemental crits. It gets pushed to 1.3, 1.35, and 1.4 respectively with each point that you get in critical boost. So it's linearly scaling, doesn't move up any higher than that, and is important when we're going to talk about the skill synergy section in just a moment. Critical Eye. Now, Critical Eye increases crit chance up to a cap of 30%. This doesn't scale indefinitely, of course. And one thing to note when it comes to Critical Eye, at going from level 3 to level 4 is the highest boost you will get moving forward. So as you can see, at level 1 you only get +3, to level 2 it's another 3%, level 3 is actually 4% increase, level 4 is a 5% increase, and it'll be 5% going forward from that point forward. So something to keep in mind when you're looking at skills to pick up, what's going to be more worth your time. Now, another skill that we have to take a look at in this situation, one that I primarily don't use as a core skill. It's one that just kind of, if you get it, then cool, it's useful, but it does help for our damage as well. Agitator. Agitator increases our attack and crit chance whenever a monster is enraged. Increases linearly, always +4 attack per point, and +6 or +3 crit. So +4 attack, +3 crit. So if you get a point in it, its value even at 1 point, going all the way up to 5, but I wouldn't put it as a core skill because it's only up when a monster is enraged. The only reason we have it so high on our skill list is because, one, we value crit relatively high, and it affects our crit, and two, there's another skill that affects crit that we flat out just can't use. We'll talk about in just a moment, but we'll get to that in just a sec. Next on our list, so this skill comes with a disclaimer as well because it is a trap I have found for most people. Attack Boost. Attack Boost increases non-elemental attack power and improves at higher levels. So seems like, you know, pretty standard. You get flat attack buffs. I will say anything past level 4 crit or anything past level 4 attack boost is a trap. The reason I say that is flat attack buffs in Monster Hunter World heavily DR. They're crazy DR'd. By DR, what I mean is diminishing returns. The more you get them, the less impact they have. At 4 points, you get 5 crit as well, so there's value there, and you'll see that it is used in some builds. And with an elemental crit build, you do value your raw damage as well, since raw is so strong in Monster Hunter World. You still want to keep your raw at a pretty decent amount, but you're not going to value it super high. Next on our list, alongside of attack buffs, is Peak Performance. Peak Performance increases our attack when your HP is full. 3 ranks up to 20 attack. Pretty strong. It gets stronger the higher you get into it. So just 1 point, it's a +5 attack, +10, and then +20. So pretty strong the higher you get up. But like attack buff, this is a flat attack bonus, which is heavily DR'd. And I'm actually going to post, for a lot of these things, I'm going to be posting links in the video descriptions to website posts that people have already gone over a lot of this math, and a really cool damage video that someone in the Monster Hunter community did. I'll post a link to his video in the description. I would highly recommend checking it out because it goes over exactly how this diminishing return actually works out. Next on our list, we're going to take a look at Marathon Runner, because a lot of people tell me about this when I stream, and yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with this skill. So Marathon Runner slows down stamina depletion for actions which continuously drain stamina, such as dashing and demon mode. Now, our demon mode is very strong. We want to be in it as often as we possibly can. However, Marathon Runner does have a cap of 50%. We can get 25% alone from dash juice, which is, if you really think about it, it's not too difficult to get a hold of if you go about getting it the right way, which is getting it from the Elder Melder, getting it from the Argusian, I forget how to pronounce his name, getting it from the dude that brings you stuff, and sending out your tail riders to constantly collect dash extract for you. Not too hard to keep your dash juice up. You really don't need much past this, and if you're playing dual blades right, you're going to be dipping in and out of your demon mode into your arc demon mode and utilizing that as well, going back and forth between them. So you really don't need Marathon Runner in most situations, if not all. So it's great if you get it tacked on. It's great quality of life. It does help increase your damage, technically speaking, because you'll be in demon mode longer, but it's not necessary, and I personally don't use it in any of my builds. If you're going to use it, use 2 points and then drink dash juice. That'll be plenty. Now, the final skill we're going to look at, and one that you should never take under any circumstances, whereas I actually was just memeing about this skill with a friend in another stream. We thought about something that'd be pretty crazy. It's great for other builds, but awful for this one. If I can actually find it. Where are you? There you are. Maximum Might. Maximum Might is 3 ranks, increases your affinity by 30% in the 3rd rank, which is awesome. It increases it when your stamina is full. Your stamina is never going to be full while you're attacking if you're playing dual blades correctly. There is one situation, one very specific situation, and that is if you go into the draw attack with dual blades while you have Arc Demon mode active and you don't instantly go into demon mode right afterwards. That is the one time you'll attack where your stamina will still be full. And in most situations, you might be sprinting into that attack anyway, so your stamina probably still won't be full. But other than that, you never have full stamina. Now, the meme we were talking about was if dash juice worked the way it did in the past Monster Hunter games, this skill plus dash juice or mega dash juice would be insane. But unfortunately, that's not how it works in this game. We'll never have full stamina, so you should never really go for maximum might. It's just not that useful. And those other skills that I mentioned that you really aren't going to favor is Protective Polish is great as a decoration, and we'll use it in some of our builds, but you should never go for it as a 4-piece set bonus. It's not worth your time. It's not worth the loss of damage from taking 4 pieces of Odogaron, which you'd think, hey, 4 pieces of Odogaron, they have crit, they have Protective Polish, it'd be pretty smart or pretty strong, right? Not really, no. Because if you have 4 pieces of Odogaron, you can have 2 pieces of Rathalos, and that's going to be stronger. Other than that, the other skill we're looking at is Xeno'jiiva's Divinity. It's just not worth it, really. There's going to be a weapon later on in PC, and if you guys are on PS4 or Xbox, you already know about this skill. It's going to be baked into one of the weapons, so it's just not worth your time either. So 3 points of it can be used in some situations, but not really that great. Let's see, Nergigante Hunger, it's just not, it's weaker than the health augment, so if you get it, awesome, glad you get it, really not that great. And there was one last one, Teostra Technique, Master's Touch. So again, this is useful in some builds, specific setups. Again, I know there's a really good 3-piece Teostra, 2-piece Rathalos setup that you can do with Nergigante's Claws. That is a great against Nergigante for raw damage, as well as keeping your affinity up and not having to sharpen ever. Or keeping your sharpness up so you don't have to sharpen ever. But other than that, really, not really something I prioritize in most of my setups, because you don't really always get to hit. A lot of these Master's Touch builds require that you hit the weak spot on a monster, and in multiplayer, you really don't always get to hit that weak spot reliably. You're still going to lose sharpness relatively quick, but it still has its place, and it's still pretty strong. But that's really about it when we're looking at skills. Now, I'm sure those of you guys who are really paying attention, who use dual blades a lot, are probably noticing I'm missing one skill from all of this. And we're going to talk about it in just a second. But that skill is getting its own section completely, actually. So let's move down. Next, we're going to take a look. We're going to talk about skill synergy. Now, elemental damage has few ways of being increased. So the idea here is we want to do our best to get it as high as we possibly can without sacrificing too much raw damage. The higher the elemental damage, the stronger the crit's going to be. Even though raw damage isn't what we're actually basing our builds around, the skills like critical boost are going to get a lot of value since we're trying to crit anyway. So the idea is that we're pushing our crit, or well, I couldn't speak for a moment. We're pushing our element as high as we possibly can to help for the elemental crit, while also pushing up our raw damage to help with our raw damage crits, because we're going to be critting regardless. I'm gonna link Reddit user RedNU23 had a really awesome post about the elemental crit caps and kind of how they work out on individual weapons and how elemental crit is calculated. So you guys should check that out. Really great information. I'll have that link posted for you. And then the skill that we didn't go over that is going to get its own section completely because of how it works out. If I can find this skill, because it would be great if I was actually prepared ahead of time, but we're kind of just not in the slightest. It's definitely in here. We'll look at it in charms, because I know I can find it in charms extremely easily. Unless I already passed it somehow. There it is. Handicraft. So, handicraft got its own section because sharpness gets its own section. And handicraft is a skill that is exactly as it says. It extends the weapon's sharpness gauge. However, it will not increase the gauge past its maximum, meaning there are weapons that do have a maximum amount of sharpness that they can gain. Things like Nergigante's claws can't get any benefit from handicraft because their sharpness gauge is already maxed. Now, dual blades do lose sharpness at an alarming rate. It's very, very high. It's not the highest in the game. Actually, fun fact, dual blades lose sharpness at 1/3 the rate every other weapon does. That's gonna sound insane, but the way you can test this out too yourselves, I should show you guys really quick. And grab the weapon really fast. Forge. Where are you? Here you are. The Basilhawk Rookslayer. The Basilhawk Rookslayer has exactly enough space to fit in 5 points of handicraft, which would give you 50 units of sharpness. And if you were to take this weapon with 5 levels of handicraft, take it into the training yard, go into demon mode, and just hit 1 attack. You'll swing your weapon once, 1 hit, 1 unit of sharpness lost. You'll get 150 hits out of it. Now, I'm not going to do it in this video. It takes a really, really long time. So if you guys want to test it out yourselves, I implore you, use this weapon, get 5 levels of handicraft, and go give it a shot. It's just dual blades attack so many times, you still lose a ton of sharpness. So it's really easy for it to happen. So handicraft is definitely useful in situations where you can push yourself either into white sharpness or give yourself enough of a chunk of blue sharpness that you're not going to have to sharpen in the middle of the fight. Your goal is to, if you need to sharpen, it's going to happen more so between monster transitions if they leave the area, something like that, or not have to sharpen at all if you're lucky. You know, if your group does enough damage. There's some hunts where I, specifically against Valhazak, with these weapons, I'm thinking about adding a little bit of handicraft just because I end up in red sharpness because I refuse to sharpen, which you'll find in just a moment is extremely detrimental for elemental damage. So let's take a look at sharpness. Actually, I think I'm going to change my set so you guys can see something that'll use... There we go. This has white on it. So we'll use this here specifically. So when we're looking at sharpness, sharpness is important to consider at when looking at your weapon, both during a quest and when picking one out. There's separate modifiers for both raw and elemental damage. The difference between white and blue or raw damage, about roughly 10%. When you're looking at elemental, it's only about 6%. So keep that in mind, they both stack. So you're getting damage out of both of them, elemental and raw, since we're building for both. Now we're looking at raw damage. The sharpness multiplier we're looking at is 0.5 for red, 0.75 for orange, 1.0 for yellow, so that's our baseline. That's our, our absolute, minimum we want to go for. 1.05 for green, 1.20 for blue, and then 1.32 for white. So as you can see, between blue and white, you've got about a 10% buff. But between yellow and green, there's really not much of a change. It's not really that high. So it's not a huge problem to drop down to yellow if you're just looking at raw damage from green. But between, of course, green and blue, bigger buff. So keep that in mind when you're looking at your sharpness during a hunt. Now, when it comes to elemental, it's a little bit different. Red, you've got a 0.25 multiplier. Orange is a 0.5. Yellow is a 0.75. Green is a 0.1. I'm sorry, is a 1.0. Now, that's our baseline, unlike raw, where yellow was our baseline. Blue is 1.0625, and white is 1.125. So, as you can see, about between blue and white, we've got about 6%. So, something important to consider when we're looking at our weapon selection. So, situations like this, where we're using just a raw damage weapon, Granted, I have a build that, you know what, let's switch it. Let's switch it to something that you guys can see it a little bit better. There we go. Firesen. So a build like this doesn't benefit from handicraft whatsoever because our sharpness is already maxed out. But we've got about, I would say, roughly 30 units, 30 to 40 units of white here, and about 50 units of blue. So we've got a good amount of space to attack in, where we're going to keep up relatively high amounts of sharpness. That means it's going to keep us at a high multiplier. So it's something important to consider during a hunt itself. Don't be like me and be stubborn and just keep attacking when you want to keep damage up. It's going to hurt your damage overall, and in most situations you'll end up losing out on more damage than you would have had if you would have taken a couple seconds to back off and just sharpen. Anyway guys, that's going to bring us to the end of the first part of this video. In the next video we're going to go over armor pieces to consider, as well as our overall builds that we will be utilizing for elemental dual blades. We'll also be covering the actual dual blades themselves too. I didn't mention that at the beginning of the video, but we will cover the dual blades themselves as well. Anyways, thanks for joining me on this video, and I'll see you all in the next one.